Hi and welcome to the next episode of our TecTalk Aftermarket podcast here at Automechanika Frankfurt from the show floor from our Tech Alliance booth. And we have a new guest. It's Neil Fryer from PHINIA. Hi Neil, thanks a lot for coming to our show.
Looking forward very much to it.
And many of you, I know, probably know Neil already because he's one of the aftermarket veterans, I would say. But for the few people who don't know you already, could you give us a quick introduction?
Of course. This year I've been working in the aftermarket for 34 years. I started my career with Lucas, which was a UK-based component manufacturer. And while I worked for Lucas, I worked in Italy for a while. Then I went back to the UK. In the early 2000s, I joined Bosal, the exhaust manufacturer, and from there moved to Fiat Group Automobiles, as it was then, working in their parts and service division based in Turin. And that was a very interesting experience to understand the aftermarket from the point of view of the vehicle manufacturer rather than the suppliers in the independent aftermarket. So useful, interesting experience, which maybe we'll talk about a little bit more.
We will.
After that, I had my own consultancy company for a while, really consulting with component manufacturers, also doing some work for Tech Alliance. And then in 2014, I joined TRW, going back to the business that I worked in Lucas in the 90s, which was then part of TRW. And from there, in 2017, I joined Delphi, as it was. And since then, that company has been Delphi Technologies, part of Borg-Warner, and now we are an independent company called PHINIA. And we are essentially, on the OE side, the old Lucas Fuel Systems business, which became part of Delphi in the early 2000s.
Yeah.
Plus Delco Remy starters and alternators for commercial vehicles, and an aftermarket business. And we are very, very focused on the aftermarket. We believe it's a key part of our business. It's over 30% of our sales today, and we want to make it 40% of company sales by 2030. So we are, I think, unique in the aftermarket because we are such a big proportion of a Tier 1 OE supplier. Many of our competitors are maybe 10 to 15% of their company's business.
Yeah.
But having such a large proportion in the aftermarket means we really focus on the aftermarket. We work closely with our fuel systems colleagues to make sure that they understand what the aftermarket needs and that we can bring that to our customers.
No, and you mentioned your experience on the OEM side and that it was quite useful for you and your further career. And the OEMs, you know, are always like a big topic in the aftermarket.
Yes.
And there's especially on the German side of the market, there's always this big, we just said it in a different recording, there's the big German angst of the OEMs entering the aftermarket. And I mean, there are some OEMs who have like a sound strategy, like Stellantis, for example. They're very keen on their aftermarket business. But what's your take on OEMs entering the aftermarket?
I mean, I think there are really two things to think about. I think that the aftermarket is one big market, partially serviced by the OEMs, partially serviced by independent aftermarket players. Yes. And the relative size of the OEMs and the relative size of the independent aftermarket differs depending on the products that you are selling. But overall, everybody's objective is to make sure that the consumer that buys a vehicle is able to repair and maintain that vehicle in the right way as it goes through its life. My personal view is that although the vehicle manufacturers will always tell you that they want to control 100% of the aftermarket, it's not realistic.
No.
The volume of vehicles that need to be serviced and repaired is far more than the vehicle manufacturer authorized networks can handle. So the vehicle manufacturers need a healthy independent aftermarket for cars which are later in their life. And I think that we should have healthy competition between the independent aftermarket and the vehicle manufacturer channel. and that is good for consumers. So, I think there are certain things that vehicle manufacturers probably do better than independent aftermarket, but there are certain things that independent aftermarket does just as well or maybe better. And, we see that in terms of parts, where there are many aftermarket manufacturers who will re-engineer an OE part to perform better.
Yeah.
Because the vehicle in service throws up problems which you don't see when you're designing the vehicle when it's new. So that's a big benefit from the aftermarket. Also, it's about the service you can give to the customer. And I think the thing that we have to remember as component manufacturers or independent aftermarket suppliers is that just having the parts isn't enough. In the same way, just having a level playing field between the independent aftermarket and the vehicle manufacturers in terms of vehicle data, access to data, all of the things that people need to repair vehicles is not enough. If you don't have the parts, access is great, but it doesn't mean anything.
No.
If you have the parts and you don't have the access, that doesn't mean anything either. So it's a holistic business, and we should think about it like that. My philosophy is you should never be afraid of competition. Competition makes you better.
Yeah.
So if the vehicle manufacturers are making us work harder, think about how to improve our business, that's good for us. Just the same as, we know that our competitors are looking at what we're doing and we're looking at what they're doing.
Yeah.
And the only way we can be successful is to run faster than our competitors.
Well, I agree. It adds to the competitiveness. So it's just another player in the bigger aftermarket ecosystem. And competitive per se, it's not a bad thing. It can be a good thing because it can be a driver of innovation as well.
Yeah, exactly. Anything that makes us examine our business and improve our business is good for us.
Yes. Totally. And talking about servicing the cars, I know you have a big focus on education of workshops. I've just been with you in the UK, and you were demonstrating your facilities. So why do you putting such a big emphasis on this educational aspect of the workshops?
We think it's very, very important to equip technicians with what they need to be able to service the vehicles that are on the road today and the vehicles that will be on the road tomorrow. And we heard this morning in the CEO breakfast the quotation about, I want to be where the puck is going, not where it is now. And we are looking at that in our education program. So we want to create a link with technicians. We want to provide them with the support they need to service the vehicles of today, but also to give them the education and training that they will need to be able to work on the vehicles which are coming into the aftermarket in the next few years. So, we see very, very strong demand for our training courses on EVs. And out of 300 training courses that we offer, something like 50 of them are related to EV and hybrid. So there's a very, very strong demand because people in workshops don't want to say no to their customer.
Yeah.
They want to say yes. So if they don't know how to work on a hybrid or an EV, they have to say no. And we will continue with that because we believe it's the way to create and sustain a healthy aftermarket. And we think that there will also be a demand, and we see some of that already, for alternative fuels too. So we have hydrogen fuel injection technology, and we have already run our first training courses for technicians who want to be trained on how to work on hydrogen-powered vehicles. The development of hydrogen in the aftermarket, in my view, will take another decade, but people want to be ready for that. And I would encourage that because, again, it makes their businesses sustainable, and that's the important thing.
No, I agree. And as you said, you want to be at the forefront. You want to look through your windshield and not in your rearview mirror. And the technology you are now educating the people in will be the technology of tomorrow. And how many of these facilities have you set up already globally?
We have, I can't remember the total number, but we have about 6 in Europe. So we have the UK, France, Germany, Spain, Italy, Poland, Turkey, China, Brazil, and we are working, and North America, of course, as well, in the US, where we have had training facilities for many years. but we're working to expand that network so that we can support our customers anywhere around the globe. And also, not just to train in our own facilities, but to go to their facilities where their customers are to do the training there as well.
No, great. And is the lessons or the topics you're dealing with in these facilities different by region? Because I can imagine like the level of the knowledge and education they have, like let's say in most European countries, will be on average probably higher than when you go to South America.
Yes, and one of the things which we have introduced, which is really helpful in that sense, is our online training program. So one of the things that we ask technicians now is to take some online courses before they come to a face-to-face training course, which helps us to get everybody up to the same level before they start. Whereas in the past, you might have said, the first half day of the course is just to get everyone up to the same level. We can bring them up to that level before they come. And I think the other big benefit of that, which we've seen particularly with EV training, is that they can go back to those training courses 6 months later or 6 weeks later. And, where they are not necessarily seeing a problem or a vehicle of that type coming into the workshop every week, they may need a refresher. So the fact that they have that online, they can go back to it and have a look, is really a good support for them in their ongoing business.
And do you think that especially the shift to electric vehicles, of course, the OEMs will try to kind of keep that business to themselves? I just had a personal experience, so I switched to a battery electric vehicle last year, and I had to go to the workshop, and it was even an OEM workshop because it is a lease car. I had to go to the OEM, and they couldn't put it on the lift because they were missing like specific pads they have to put on the list to being able to lift it because of the battery. And they told me that these pads differ from the model. And how can independent workshop, they cannot have like 20, 30 different of these pads they need.
And this is one of the things that we cover in our training courses. How do you safely put an electric vehicle onto the lift? Because if you don't know what you're doing, then you will cause some serious damage. And of course, it's dangerous as well. So we want to make sure that everybody is safe and that they're able to work on the vehicles in the right way. I think what we will see, and the independent aftermarket is very resourceful, comes up with solutions to problems. I'm sure that we will see ways of creating lifts which can cope with more than one vehicle model in the future. But again, the penetration of EVs is growing, but I think on the latest statistics I was looking at, by 2033,
not as fast as everybody was making us to believe.
But by 2033, maybe 20% of the vehicles on the road will be electric. And that's probably when you will start to get some critical mass where people start to say, okay, it's worth investing in equipment, it's worth producing some things that workshops need specifically to work on these vehicles. You have to get that momentum, you have to get that critical mass before it happens. And that, of course, comes back to the point I was making before. If 80% of the vehicles on the road still have some form of combustion engine, whether they're hybrids, plug-in hybrids, or pure internal combustion engine vehicles, those vehicles will need to be serviced and repaired for a long time to come. I think that's true in the passenger car market. It's even more important in the commercial vehicle market, where we see, that we are signing contracts with truck manufacturers with end of production in 2035 and a service life of 15 years, taking us to 2050. So I'm sure that things will change, technologies will evolve, and maybe in 10 years' time we will see that electric vehicle adoption has been faster than what we think it is today. But 5 years ago we thought it would be faster than it has been in the last 5 years. So that's why I think it's important for people in the aftermarket to be ready. You have to be ready to deal with the vehicles of tomorrow, but you have to deal with the vehicles of today. If we can support technicians and our other customers, our distribution customers, to be ready to do that, then that's the most important thing. And that's how we as an industry will survive and thrive in the future.
You mentioned hydrogen vehicles, so you on purpose you are open to whatever technology is coming to be prepared for the future, because I think like in the broader public discussion it's always very black and white, and I guess maybe in the end what we're thinking what will happen from our perspective now, maybe it will be different like in 10, 15, 20 years.
Yes, I mean I think that if we take a step back from the transport sector, and if you look at the emissions in the world, we need to get to net zero. We need to take some serious action in many sectors, and the transportation sector is one of them. And we think at PHINIA that we can make a contribution to net zero by helping to make internal combustion cleaner, by looking at alternative fuels which can make internal combustion zero emission. And then we will see that electric vehicles are part of the solution, alternative fuels are part of the solution, and maybe some technologies we don't even know yet that will be innovated in the next few years. The important thing is for us to reduce those emissions and get to net zero. So, we think there will always be demand in certain applications for a gaseous fuel injection technology to work. It'll be not the whole of the market as it has been historically. It will be a part of the market, and then another part of the market will be EV. So, in big cities, EV is clearly probably the way to go, providing you can create the charging infrastructure for people. But for long distance, for off-road applications, maybe for some agricultural applications, it's going to be different. No, I agree. And now we are talking about EVs. We are also already in the sustainability topic, and I guess sustainability is a big topic for many of the manufacturers. But the aftermarket, when you look at it from a certain perspective, is or always has been by design a sustainability industry, because our task is to keep, nowadays it's called mobility, but our task is to keep cars on the road so that they can be driven longer, which per se is something which pays into the sustainability factor. Exactly, and I think it's really important to think about that, particularly when you think about the components which go to make up the powertrain of a vehicle. Using components which have the quality to bring the emissions of the vehicle back to the standard that they were the day it left the production line when it was new is a really important part of sustainability. Doing a cheap repair that gets the vehicle back on the road but leaves it not meeting the emission standards is not what we want to see. And again, for our philosophy is we want to help technicians to repair vehicles so that they are performing as they were the day they were new. So we really want to encourage technicians to think in that way. I think the other thing which will become increasingly important in the aftermarket is remanufacturing. And I think that, that's an interesting discussion as well in the context of vehicles. We have seen in the last 20 years, increasing regulations around making sure that you're able to recycle certain proportion of a vehicle when it comes to the end of its life. If electric vehicles become like white goods and you say, I buy a new fridge today, I expect in 8 years' time I will have to throw it away and buy a new one. If cars become like that, that will create a huge problem in terms of sustainability that I don't think is necessarily being thought through or addressed at the moment. So that's something that will be interesting to see how we develop to deal with that.
Yeah, and you can already see some factors who pay into this perspective, because like many people are hesitant to buy an electric vehicle now. Also, it's not because of the range, and this is also where the discussion is about, but I guess many people are also concerned about resale value.
Exactly, and resale value, and again, I talked about critical mass before, and I think critical mass is important. We don't have critical mass in manufacturing electric vehicles today. The cost must come down as critical mass is reached. And maybe that will make the vehicles more affordable. But at the price they are today, I think we have seen very clearly in the last 12 months, if you take the incentives away, suddenly sustainability is not such a compelling argument for people when they come to buying a vehicle. So, we have to get to a point where the cost of buying and owning an electric vehicle is competitive with an internal combustion engine vehicle.
And on a global scale, so what are currently the focus markets or topics you are currently dealing with in the different regions?
Well, I think this is a really interesting one when we look forwards. Today, we have very mature markets in North America and in Europe, and a relatively mature market, but a different kind of market in South America. And then you have a lot of developing markets in Asia, particularly China and India, which have different characteristics. And when you look at the United Nations population growth statistics, which say that the population of the world, I think, will be 9.5 billion by 2050. The growth is in South America and the growth is in Asia outside China.
Yeah.
And those markets will develop an aftermarket or develop a mobility market, let's say, that needs an aftermarket to support it.
Yeah.
Where we don't really play today. So we have to think about how we can develop into that market, how we will support those vehicles. And in some cases, when you think about Africa, vehicles may be exported from other markets when they're older and at the end of their life. But that then brings us back to that point. If you want to do something about emissions, if you want to be on the net zero journey, you need to find a way to repair those vehicles so that the emissions are like they were when those vehicles were new. So I think we as an industry have a challenge to think about how we will do that.
No, totally. And also being prepared for a certain amount of uncertainty, because of course we can look back. How did we develop the aftermarket over here in Europe, maybe also in North America? But it's complete different circumstances now, and we cannot take Europe as a blueprint and kind of force fit it into China, into India, into South America. It doesn't work.
I think that's absolutely right, and I think that we probably have been guilty, if that's the right word, as an industry, in thinking that new emerging markets will develop and be exactly the same as the mature markets we have today. I think they all have their own different characteristics, and they will continue to have their different characteristics. So it's also up to us as as suppliers to make sure that we are able to support the characteristics of those businesses and to be successful in the way we do that. Which doesn't mean just assuming that everything will be the same as Europe and trying to apply that business model in different countries where it's not going to work.
No, I agree. Then you will start struggling, and looking back and making use of your vast experience. In your opinion, how did the aftermarket change within the last 20 years?
Yeah, I think that's an interesting question too. I mean, I think that we have seen very much the explosion of complexity.
Yeah.
With many more vehicles, many more variants of vehicles, many more parts. I mean, I can remember going to India, for example, 15, 20 years ago, and you would find somebody who would say, I am an expert in wheel bearings. I know all the part numbers in my head for every vehicle that's on the road. Anybody comes in, I say, this is the bearing you need. You can't do that anymore.
No.
There is so much complexity, so many items, so many part numbers. We've seen the development of electronic cataloging like TecTalk and other things to be able to cope with that. And that's only going to continue and increase, I think. So our business has become much more complex. Our supply chains have become longer because, 25 years ago, we were manufacturing products much closer to the markets we sell them in.
Yeah.
And I think that's another interesting argument in sustainability. It's much more sustainable to manufacture the components close to the place that you consume them.
Yeah.
But people have been much keener to look for the lowest possible price, regardless of the sustainability, the implications of maybe shipping those products 6,000 miles around the globe to get them to the place where you sell them. Can we continue with that? I think that's a really interesting question, which I don't know the answer to.
No, and I agree. But these topics need to be included in the sustainability discussion, because and again, it's more or less solely focused on the actual car currently, and on the engine type, which is like only like a fraction of the whole value chain.
Yes, and we really have to think about that. And I think maybe the COVID-19 pandemic was a trigger for people to start to think about that in a way that they hadn't done before. We have made some steps. Maybe some people talk about, we want near-shoring of parts because we don't want to be exposed to those big disruptions in the supply chain when you get a black swan event like a pandemic.
And we had the pandemic and his remember this ship which was stuck in the Nile as well. It was kind of at the same time.
Well, exactly. And we had the pandemic. We've had that ship that was stuck in the Suez Canal, wasn't it? And then we have currently the disruption in the Middle East and ships having to come around Africa, which is adding 2 or 3 weeks to the shipping time and so on. So I think we have to think about those things. And as I said before, it's maybe a bit of a cynical viewpoint, but when there's no subsidy, then people are not so interested in sustainability as they are when they see that there's a subsidy, and that makes it better value for them. So maybe it's a generational thing. We were, people who are, let's say, 15 to 25 years old today think about it in a different way.
No, I agree.
But for old people like me, we need to start thinking about those kind of things. It's how do we do things in the most sustainable way possible?
No, and also there's like a big chance in it, because we talked about these new and emerging markets, be it China, Asia, South America, and if we are not using the blueprint we have in our cupboard, it's actually a big chance of creating a more sustainable market from all the knowledge we have now.
Exactly, and I think we have not seen the big impact of digitalization in the aftermarket really yet. I think there will, manufacturing technology will, I think, develop in such a way that we could eliminate huge amounts of inventory from our supply chain.
Yeah.
Because if you can use 3D printing to produce a part, why would you ever need to produce it until you actually need it because it's failed?
Yeah, maybe it will lead to a decentralization of production.
Yes, and you can think about whoever designs the product in the first place. They just sell a license to print it once.
Yeah.
And there's the replacement part.
No.
Totally. So there are many things you can think about in how digitalization and innovation and technological development could impact the aftermarket.
But in a nutshell, we can summarize that the future for the automotive aftermarket is not grim. There are a lot of chances. There's a possibility to create even a new aftermarket and evolve the aftermarket further into a more sustainable future.
I very much think so, yes. And coming back to the point we were making before, don't be afraid of competition. Don't be afraid of innovation. It will bring new opportunities if you approach it in the right way, and you can think about the way that you can work with those things to do something which helps with sustainability, helps with the experience for the vehicle owner, makes life better for somebody in one way or another.
I guess that's some very wise words, and we're coming to an end of our current episode. Thank you very, very much for your time. I know you've been busy today, and you will be busy afterwards. But now we go and have our well-deserved drink. Thank you
that
very
sounds
much.
like
Neil.
a great idea. Thank you very much indeed, Christian. Thank you.